Folks, welcome to episode 2 of the Mind Your Miles podcast. My name is Nick Hilton. I am here with my friends Dylan Bellis and Will Baldwin. We are so excited to be back for episode 2 here. We're going to start off with a little rapid fire question here. Dylan Bellis, what is your favorite kind of cereal?
I'm a big Lucky Charms guy. Yeah, I love Lucky Charms, and I usually don't eat it with milk either. It's more of like a nighttime snack before bed situation. So
So
yeah, Lucky Charms. That's my cereal go
Like
to.
what parents do for their children. They give them like a bowl of Cheerios.
I actually eat all the little niblets first, and then I'll save all the marshmallows for last. So
I'm
yeah,
glad to know that Dylan still has the snacking habits of a toddler. He's just
delayed gratification.
sitting there at his high chair before Betty by having his Lucky Charms that he's snacking on. Will, what about you? What is your favorite kind of cereal?
Man. I don't know. I eat a lot of honey bunches of oats.
Interesting.
And you,
So
Nick?
a little more of a healthy cereal for Will. I mean, I have to channel my childhood here, and it has to be Count Chocula because then the milk is just fire after you finish off the cereal. Just a nice glass of chocolate milk after that. So if I had to choose my favorite cereal, that would be it. Although I don't eat a lot of cereal anymore because it's just it really just kind of a sugar bomb. So I kind of stick to my granola now. But all right, so let's get into the main topics today. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to dig into ourselves a bit more, give you a little more information about how me, Dylan, and I know each other. So we can kind of understand our relationship going into this.
You said me, Dylan, and I.
All right, well, let's edit that part out.
That's okay. That's okay. We can roll with it.
No, that's cool. I would love to hear how you guys know each other.
I've had to get to know myself a lot over these past couple of years. I feel like that's an important part of the coaching journey.
Did you guys know each other first?
Yeah,
I definitely knew Dylan. I knew Dylan before I knew you, for sure.
Briefly.
Yeah. So I'm going to kick it over to Will to start here, as I feel like he might have been the last person to kind of join the crew here. Will, how did you meet Dylan Bellis?
And don't lie, I know this one.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's more of how I met you, because I met Nick first. And then, because I used to live with Nick many years ago. And then I feel like one day we were going to, oh, no, you're right. Oh my gosh. No, it's from Kia, right?
Yep.
Well, a lot of people know Kia Dandana, but there was this guy that lived in Flag a long time, and he was famous for like kind of cycling through and using workout partners. And because he was really fast, and so he would get guys like me and Dylan and kind of pick on us, but it was a lot of fun. And so one day he talked me and Dylan into showing up to a workout together at Buffalo Park. But Kia's thing was always like he would kind of weave you a story of what the workout would be to like make you feel good about it. So I'm pretty sure it was like we were doing like 2-mile reps, because Buffalo is like a 2-mile loop. And I swear he told me like, I don't know, like 5:15 or 5:20 pace or something like that, where I'm like, that's money for me. Yeah, I mean, I can do that. At Buffalo, it's pretty hard, but a 2-mile, you get a little rest. And I was like, okay, perfect. And like first mile, it's kind of uphill. And I'm pretty sure we're like 5 flat or 5:05.
That's right.
And I was like, oh crap, I'm screwed. And so I probably made it through like 2 of them that were like almost all out for me. And that was,
Kia, you knew it was going to be 15 to 20 seconds faster than whatever he said it was. If
we didn't at the time.
20,
we did not know at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took me a long time to learn that. I learned that lesson probably 9 times. I remember one time I did a fartlek with him on Lake Mary Road, and I think I did like 1 rep, like a 1 minute or a 3 minute. It was just like however the discrepancy of what I thought was going to happen and what happened was so massive. Yeah. And so, yeah, then we met there, and we were, kindred spirits. But I can't remember where that fit in with when I knew you guys, because I knew Dylan would show up to the house every once in a while and work out with us.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, so yeah, I was just gonna piggyback off of what Will was saying, and yeah, so it was a 3x2 mile workout at Buffalo Park, and Kia led us to believe it was going to be 5:15 or 5:20 pace. And the first one was 10 minutes easily was 10 minutes to the 2-mile dirt rolling type of
Back when
hill.
we could do stuff like that, when
And
I
this
could
was,
a
for
10
anybody's
mile.
listening, this is at 7,000 feet, on a hilly gravel loop. Like 10 minutes is probably, that's like a 9:30 2-mile rep, most likely down at sea level. So it was
Thanks,
pretty
Nick.
hot.
Thanks for that really gracious buffer there.
Although Kia did typically skip the hill, so maybe 9:40.
That's true. I also learned that. I used to go to Buffalo and run it, and then I didn't even know about that. I was like, I don't think I've actually, I know I've never intentionally run the big hill since Kia showed me that.
Yeah, we don't do the hill. But yeah, we lasted 1 rep, and then Will, you and I did the second rep together, and then the third rep, I don't even know if we completed it or we just basically jogged it, but we were pretty much toast before that. But I remember specifically when he was like, "Yeah, we're waiting on another guy to come. His name is Will," and I didn't know who you were at the time, but you showed up, and Will was decked out in like all Nike head to toe. I believe it was summertime. I'm pretty sure it was at least around. It was in that time frame. But Will was wearing tights, long sleeve, I thought he was a professional runner for Nike. So, but yeah, we got into the workout and we were humbled very quickly by a guy who is a lot more talented than we are.
Hey, actually, because of Kia, that's how I met Nick too. I was running the bagel run, and I had already met Tyler Germain, and I was on the bagel run, and I was like right behind them. We were all talking, and Tyler was like real mad at Kia, and they were like kind of arguing because they had all agreed to live together. But then like last minute, Kia found a different house, and I was living way out in Doney, which I didn't know that wasn't like cool. And Tyler was like upset, and I was like, "What? You guys need a roommate? What's going on?" He was like, "Yeah, like me and some other dudes found this house, and we need one more dude." And I was like, "I'm in."
It's funny. I forgot that Kia was even supposed to live there. I must have just blocked that out of my memories of him, because that probably made me pretty mad as well. But yeah, I don't really recall
What an
meeting you.
upgrade for you guys.
I know what a huge W for us. The vibes would have been way worse without Will Baldwin in that house. But I don't even really recall meeting you maybe more than like once or twice before you moved into the house with us. To be honest, like maybe we went on a couple runs together, but I don't have like any strong memories of that prior to you moving into the house.
No, I don't either. That's when like Nick was like on his like unfriendly, no new friends stage.
Well, I'd been in Flagstaff for quite a while, and I'd cycled through enough new guys that I was pretty much ready to just like, all right, I've got my training partners. We don't need to introduce any more newbies into this gang here, because they're just going to leave and, use us for our clout essentially. So yeah, you get a little curmudgeonly up there after a while. I think,
Yeah.
Will, you could probably attest to that as well, having been there, having had lived in Flagstaff for a long time.
I'm coming full circle back around. I'm really friendly and nice again now.
That's good. Well, hopefully you just keep coming full circle again. You become an old curmudgeon in 5 more years, and you're just like, screw this. I've had enough of these guys. Dylan, I think I remember meeting you when you were just a wee little intern, coming to work for Stephen Haas when he was the head of Team Run Flagstaff, and you were out there for the summer, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And then you moved back to North Carolina, and then you came back out again. Was that how that went?
Yeah, so I had an internship over the summer. I went to school, and then I actually came back over the winter, and then I went back to school to finish up my last year of eligibility, and then I moved back in May or June of that following year.
Was that 2016, 2015?
Yeah, it was the summer of 2015 is when I believe I met you through TRF, and then it was 2016 in which I moved back, and then basically just try to get involved with as much as I could, continue to get involved with TRF and Run Flagstaff, and then you got me the job at Run Flagstaff. So
Yeah, we don't need to talk about the job or the or how that went, but yeah, if you didn't really get the gist here, I was the first one of the 3 of us to move to Flagstaff. I ended up there in 2012. Dylan was second, and then Will, what year did you move out there?
January of 2016.
2016. So we all crossed paths there for a number of years before, I moved out for a little bit in 2017 before moving back again in, late 2018. Dylan, I know you were in and out a few times, and same with you. Will, you were pretty much there the whole time, right? You kind of from 2016 through. Oh no, that's right. You did move to Boulder, right?
In Oklahoma.
And Oklahoma, yeah. So Flagstaff has this weird way of inviting you in, kicking you out, bringing you back in. So there's some weird stuff with that town with how that works. But none of us live in Flagstaff right now, so we've all been kicked out again.
Dylan
Although
does.
that's right. Well, he's leaving. It doesn't really count. He's
I'm
moving
about to.
elsewhere.
So
Yeah. Anyways, let's talk about some of the main topics today after a little bit of banter about our backgrounds. So today we're going to get into, which I think is an appropriate topic for this time of year. We're going to talk about season planning. So kind of planning out, your full year, planning out an individual season. We're going to talk a little bit about race selection and those conversations that we have with athletes. So I guess the first thing I want to get into here is really how do you guys build out a seasonal calendar? So when we're looking at the big picture of things, I think we should start the conversation with the broad concepts, and then we can kind of narrow down into the specifics from there. So let's talk about looking at a year-long calendar. When you're talking with an athlete, like, are you building around certain races? Are you do you go into these conversations trying to gauge what your athlete's goals are, and going from there? What do those conversations look like between you guys and your athletes? We'll start with Dylan. He looks ready to answer.
Yeah, I like to first get a gauge on what races they're interested in first. So most of the people that either just meeting them or we're turning the calendar year, they've already signed up for races in the spring or the fall of that year. And so I like to just get the idea of what races they're planning on doing, and then trying to determine which one of those are going to be the most important. So I try, for example, if someone is training for the marathon, I really want to make sure that we don't plan too many of those in a calendar year. I have some people who will go from marathon to marathon to marathon, and that really prevents them from being able to actually train effectively for one given marathon. You're just constantly recovering and then trying to bring it back together. So ideally, I'd like to limit the amount of buildups that we do over the course of a year. So maybe 2 marathons, if maybe 3 over the course of a year.
do you guys all
And
agree on that? That like 2 to 3 is pretty much about what you would tell people?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd prefer one, but no one really wants to hear that. I think that two I think is probably the sweet spot. Three seems like a lot. I mean,
I
there's
guess it
only
also
50.
depends. Like if you do one really early in the year, like
Yeah,
Jan,
you do
Feb, March.
Houston or Mesa or in February or something like that. That kind of changes the calendar, and that's a whole other conversation. Like the calendar changes depending on where the athlete lives. Someone living in the Southwest is going to have a different racing calendar, or they should at least, to take advantage of their weather versus somebody in the Northeast. But yeah, I don't like to do more than 2 a year if possible.
I like to have just enough time and space to where we can develop other facets of training other than just the marathon. A lot of people will go right to the marathon and just want to do marathon training all year round. But I really do think that every athlete needs to revisit some form of, we'll call it speed, but in general, we're just talking about 5K or 10K types of training throughout the year before going into the specific marathon phase of training. Because I feel like if we just go from marathon to marathon, we're really limiting the ceiling, and then the rate of progress just dips.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, is there anything different you do with your athletes when it comes to that conversation?
Yeah, I think one big area of growth I've made is like really honing in and listening, because I coach a very broad spectrum of people, and I think initially, like many years ago when I started coaching, like sometimes I would put how I would do things or how I would approach a season. But I have a lot of people that just love to race. Like I have some people that don't care how fast they run, and then there's people who like, all I want to do is run 2:30, or I want to qualify for Boston. And so really like listening, and then also sometimes not even just listening, but watching their actions. Like, because sometimes people say like, all I want to do is run this. And then every opportunity that comes up for them that makes them run slower, they will take like, oh, well, I took this trip, or oh, I picked this race and I know this race is slower. And you're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. But like, oh, like, well, these aren't maybe the decisions we would like. Maybe you do just like being out there every weekend. So, I mean, the biggest thing, yeah, is kind of setting a framework of what they want to do. If they're coming in like, I want to qualify for Boston, well, it's like, you know, these are the kind of races that will help you do that. This is kind of how we need to set a schedule up. But I coach a lady who I love working with, and her goal is to run a marathon in every state. And she's like in the 30s, you know? And so how we do training and how we plan our season is just so different. But yeah, as far as performance, like we said, like, I mean, I really need like a down period and then like 16 to 20 weeks to have like a high performance. And it's just so hard to explain this to people because they're like, okay, so I need 20 weeks. And it's like, well, no, like there's times where 16 or something smaller works, but like, you know, especially if you have two great races that are kind of close that you want to put together, like, and we all know how hard it is to get in, like grandma's. What if you got into grandma's in Chicago or something, which I don't think that window is usually that big. And they're both very hard to get into. And so you kind of want to take that. So it's like, oh yeah, we can definitely do a shorter window, but on average for high performance, like, you know, if I'm a betting man and someone has 8 weeks between marathons, they're probably not going to PR in that second one. Yeah. So the biggest thing is just listening what they really want and what they're looking for out of their running. And then oftentimes it's helping them find that, because sometimes we don't even know that ourselves, and it changes.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that it's really easy to try to put our own opinions or the way that we would train or have trained as high school, collegiate, post collegiate athletes. But the reality is that most of the people that we're working with have a very different goals, different ambitions, and the shape of those buildups aren't as direct as maybe we would visualize things. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear how you do things as well, Nick.
Well, it always starts with the conversation. And so many of my clients, there's a difference between the people I've worked with for 3 years and the people who sign up, January 10th to get ready for a spring marathon. And those conversations are different because obviously the people I've worked with for 3 years, we're developing those short-term and long-term goals together. So, we have a rapport. We know, okay, this is where we want to be in a year and a half. We want to get this qualifying mark. We want to hit this time. So what's going to be the best setup over these next 18 months to get there? Whereas a client who's just signing on typically has something that they're already planning on. So it's like, hey, I sign on in January. I'm running Boston in April, or I'm running this race to qualify for Boston. So the season planning is different based on that athlete and that client. So, with the long term ones, we really just we start with our long vision and we see what we want to do, and then we work backwards and find the best races and the best setup to kind of get them to where they need to be, making sure we set aside time to address weaknesses, and then set aside time to do stuff they like. If they like to do marathon training, then we're going to lean into that. If they like to race, they like to do the Brooklyn Mile every year or whatever, we make sure we set aside time to train and to take advantage of those things, just because it keeps them more engaged throughout the cycle.
I definitely prefer the people who will come to me and have the vision of, hey, I want to be good in 2 or 3 years, because that really does open up it opens up the ability for them to not have to rush into things and to just take it slow and really develop the training. Because when you do get constrained with those 16 weeks, your hand gets forced to maybe do a little bit more in that short period of time than you would want to, versus someone who says, I want to be good in a year or two. You don't have to do everything at one time. And I think in terms of planning, even for a given year, it's nice to have some actual time to just focus on other aspects of training that will support the marathon or the half marathon or the 5K that you're doing, versus just coming to me or coming to us and saying, I have
got
I
12
have a
weeks.
race. Yeah, 12 weeks to do it. And we all know that it's typically in the course of 12 to 16 weeks, if we're just meeting someone, it's not necessarily us who are making them better for that race themselves. Yeah, they might be doing more and they'll get better, of course, but everything that the potential that they had was all done prior to them coming to us. So it's nice having having time to really spend with that athlete and seeing them develop under what you all are working for.
Yeah. And I
So
think we just know that like how differently things can change with like multiple seasons added up. And so you're always trying to like relay that to athletes. Like, don't just give it 12 weeks. Don't just give it 20. Like, try to build a couple seasons. I tell everyone I get so excited when someone has a great, like really solid block of a marathon, not for that race. Cause I'm like, oh, this means next year is going to be like this marathon will probably go well because the training was good, maybe, but your next year is going to be super great because you're getting to stand on, this foundation we built.
So all right. So we kind of talked about what we like to do best or how we would prefer to approach it. Obviously, it's not going to be like that with every client, and sometimes these conversations start. You'll have a client who comes in with a short term vision, and then you're able to transition that into a long term vision just based on the experience they had, or the conversations that you have with that athlete about, hey, you can't really come into these things with a short term vision. It has to be long term. So that's always exciting when that happens. But let's talk about, so we kind of talked about how we like to structure a long-term build. So let's break that up into smaller chunks. So when you kind of have an idea of what your athlete's goals are, say that goal is a BQ. They want to hit a BQ for in the next 18 months. What is your next step from that? You've established the goal, what they want to do. What is your next step in the process?
Yeah, so if it's 18 months, that gives you a lot of time to work with. So ideally, I would not want to have more than 2 marathons leading up to that race. So ideally, have one big build for a marathon, reset, rebuild, and then get ready for that BQ opportunity. So usually what I will do is we got to see how far off they are first. And contrary to what you'll see a lot of people say, hey, train where you are, right? Like plan the paces based on what you're capable of doing right now. And let's say like either BQ time is, let's just say it's around 4 hours and they've run 4:30. Well, we know that to make progress, you've got to kind of have, you have to reach a little bit before you make those changes. So what I like to do is instead of saying, hey, we're going to train where you are, we're gonna train to where you want to be. However, we're gonna do that in a really smart way. So what I mean by that is we're not just gonna throw these big interval workouts or threshold or marathon based sessions at that given pace. But what I'll do is I'll start really small. So make it really easy, doable reps at faster speeds. And what I find is that most people can handle faster paces for shorter distances, especially if they're training for the marathon. A lot of individuals who come to me, they don't have the same background at the marathon. So it's usually not an endurance limitation. It's often more of a speed limitation. So I will take that individual and we'll work on training from the ground up versus the top down. So we'll do training that will help support the speed that is necessary to develop for those paces, at least in the first goings of things, and then run that first marathon, get a checkpoint, and then essentially just repeat the process again. Start small, build it up over time, and hopefully that point in time we've gotten enough legwork to have made considerable progress.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. Like maybe I'd talk about it in a different way, but almost the same setup. Like for one, you got to know a couple things. Like if it is a BQ person, I think the average it takes like 3 to 5 attempts for a person to hit a BQ, but a lot of those are just regular people going out and going for it. So with the coach, it's probably pretty much lower, probably 1 to 3. So we know that like it's rare to do it your first time. So if we have that 18, getting one in is great. And then the other reason, like I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's a super high percentage, over 70 of when they ask people why didn't they hit that goal. It's usually something physiological or like muscular, not an endurance thing. And like we kind of talked about last time, but doing the event is not as difficult as people think, especially as you go slower. To run BQ paces is pretty difficult and strenuous on your body. And so, like Dylan said, like starting small, segmenting it. Sometimes it's fun too. Like if you think you want to run a marathon at, for our faster guys who are trying to break 3, like if you think you want to run a marathon at 6:50 pace, like doing some 1 minute or 2 minute segments and just it kind of shows you like, do you think you can do this for 3 hours? I feel like a lot of times that turns the lights on for people, like, whoa, like I got to really buy into this. Yeah. And so starting to get our body able to do that movement of like moving at that pace that we're hoping to hit, and, in those small segments. And then I love to do little races along the way. I think it's so fun. Yeah. And so, trying to run some shorter races and build into that. And then, the classic, like getting a half in so we can practice everything and practice nutrition. Yeah, pretty much a lot of the same stuff D. Bellis was saying. Oh my gosh.
Obviously, you
see
can't
it?
see our screens, but Dylan just put a little thumbs up on the screen, which got Will very excited.
I don't know how
My-
that got on the screen.
You're on your iPhone, aren't you?
No,
No? My
no.
iPhone used to do that all the time.
It's just the thumbs up just keep happening.
Do you have a Mac?
Huh? Yeah.
It's called gestures. My iPhone used to do it all the time. I just would be in meetings and like kind of like doing this, and then like that cheesy thing would happen. Yours is just going rogue. Is it mine? Is mine reading it? No.
I don't know. I don't know what happened. But anyways, Nick, what are your thoughts there? Are we being, I think we probably will have to be a bit more specific, of course, just to help anybody who is listening to this. But do you have any other insight or ways you approach things that are differing from Will and I's opinion?
I mean, not necessarily terribly different. I think the language we use is different. And again, maybe this shows the differences in some of the clients that we work with as well too. I have a lot of people come in who are like, I ran 1:45 for a half, and I want to now run 3 hours for the marathon. Is that possible? And so those conversations are always a little tricky, kind of treading lightly about, okay, well, just because you ran something that feels like it's close to a 3 hour or a 3:10 marathon doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be that easy to just double these things. So I kind of try to take that into how we're building the training. And I like what Will said about, okay, hey, let's break this down and let's do a 15 by minute on, minute off at your goal pace and let me know how that feels. And that's kind of a good wake up call or indicator of where they're at. But I think again, there's a difference between clients that you've or athletes that you've worked with for 2 years and you have this vision versus someone you have brand new you have coming in. With like a brand new athlete, you have to try to get a sense of where they're actually at and what their strengths and weaknesses are. So I think trying to schedule a race of any kind within those first couple weeks, just as like a pure fitness test, I think is important and will help inform the rest of that kind of short term and long term planning. Because say you have them run a half, and maybe their half pace is, on board or close to right around what their goal marathon pace is, or maybe they run a 5K and their 5K is way faster than what their goal marathon pace is, and you have to kind of figure out how to adjust the training to kind of make for those things. So that's part of the tricky thing when you're coaching in these scenarios, because you don't always get athletes like in a high school or a college sense where you have 4 years to really learn the athlete, their strengths and weaknesses, how to shape them, how to work with them, not just physiologically, but how to, handle how to handle them emotionally and how they, you know, respond to stress and respond to the training and things of that nature, and how they overcome obstacles and um, how they overcome barriers in the training and thing when things aren't going particularly well. So a lot of it for us with this planning is like we're kind of, we have an idea of what we would like to do, but a lot of those first couple weeks where I think we have to be really fluid in how we handle it because we're coming into situations that we maybe don't know the athletes particularly well. How do you guys
And
handle those?
and also when you're talking to people like that, like they often have a different view of their own running. Like sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, well, it's always funny to hear like on an intake form, or just talking to someone initially what they think they've been doing, and then you get the like when everything's preloaded in, like you see their old training, you're like, like you probably weren't running as much as you thought you were, or and so um, that's a big thing you got to work around too, like connecting those two. But dude, that what you said about like the 145 person who wants to run 3 or whatever, like I've been using this line a million times, but it sounds so corny. But like I tell everyone, you can't run a marathon faster than your half marathon PR. It's like it's so obvious, but sometimes people forget that. Like yeah, it's like physically you cannot, like, because if you run 90 in the first half, then you technically have a new half marathon PR. And so it's like, if that discrepancy is that big, like, well, then the answer is we need to kind of be a little more 10K half marathon focused, because we're not going to go PR in the half twice.
A lot of people come in with, they want to run the marathon. You know, the marathon has a lot of prestige to it, and they just want to run marathons. But I think what we understand as coaches is that some of the biggest, the best parts of, or best ways to make progress is actually not focus on the marathon, especially for a lot of the runners who come into it a little bit later, don't have the same background, haven't built up their aerobic abilities for 10, 15 years. You need to spend time doing harder things. You have to be able to, the marathon itself and is very hard in a different way, but the actual intensity itself, at least for most of the athletes that I'm working with, it's not too much harder than maybe some of their easy paces sometimes. You know, I have some athletes who can run easy at the same pace as, you know, their marathon pace for 5 or 6 miles. But when you start doing 15 or 16 miles, they start to break down. So there's a limitation of endurance there. But I really do think that you have to spend time developing other facets of, and I keep coming back to this, other areas of your running that will help support, you know, ultimately what you can do for the marathon. I tell people pretty often that if you can improve your cruising speed, and then it's better. So if you can become faster over a mile or a 5K or a 10K, for most people who are just starting out, let's just say 2 to 4 years of experience, that will help their threshold paces get faster. That'll help their half marathon get faster, and that'll make marathon pace feel easier. And ultimately, you want to make the marathon's always going to feel as hard. You know, like if you've run 4 hours versus when you run 3 hours, it's usually as hard. It's the same intensity, but it's just practicing and getting it more fluid at a faster speed. So I think it's worthwhile, especially after coming off a marathon, to spend the next 8 to 12 weeks, if you can, doing something that is completely opposite from what you were doing during the marathon.
Dude, one thought I had about that too is like the people who are chronic marathoners, and like you said, like sometimes that pace isn't that different than their easy day pace. I think sometimes we like, and again, if you're one of those people who just loves doing the events and wants to do a ton, it doesn't really matter. But if you're one of those people who is kind of upset with that you've plateaued a little bit, I think that becomes the hard thing too, that like sometimes people get into races and it is just like an easy thing you finish, like because you do it so often, you've kind of lost that mental and physical ability to where like to push a little bit more, you just kind of slide into the too cruisy, too easy, you know, it's like it's not a race anymore. It's just something you finish. And I think when you give yourself a little gap and change that stimulus up, it helps you, you know, push a little more in there.
Yeah, you got to train different paces.
I want to farm a couple hot takes from you guys on this conversation because I want to know
Never heard
what
that phrase.
I'm farming for hot takes. We're out
He's
here
trying a
telling
lot of stuff in here. I guarantee he has a notebook of like, what was the one you said in the streets? Hot in the streets.
hot in the streets. That's a real phrase.
He's got a
It's a
notes
real
app. Like,
colloquialism.
use farm a couple ideas with
No,
Dylan and Will.
I'm out here planting the seeds and tilling the fields for hot takes. That's what I want to get here.
Anyways, farm away. Farm
All right,
away.
let's farm away here. What's your
Farmer
hot?
Nick is coming with his pitchfork. We're getting some hot takes. I want to know, how do you really feel about the marathon? Like what are your real, because obviously it's the distance, and maybe this is just like there's a fetishization of like going longer and running. It's ultras, it's long trails, it's the marathon that tends to supersede performance at every other distance. And I'm a victim of this in my own career, that I jumped to the marathon early, and probably to stunt the development of how I would have done at shorter distances, you know, at a point in my career. So I want to know what you guys feel. What do you really feel about the marathon as a race, as it pertains to your athletes, whatever?
I have hard thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, since I started running, I always wanted to run the marathon. I always thought that I always did better over longer, you know, slower kind of distances, tempo runs, longer races. I always enjoyed those a lot better. So I always thought to myself, I'm going to run a marathon one day and I'm going to really like it. Even when I was running in college and I was never even really thought about running a marathon. I remember doing longer, steadier tempo style runs and just thinking to myself, yeah, I'm going to run a marathon one day and I think I'm going to be pretty good at it. But I think for me, coming out of college, you kind of run out of the allure of doing like a 5K or a 10K. You're so used to running track races, cross country races, these smaller distances, and you need that next kind of thing to reach for. And for us, the best thing that you can do is someone who's not a professional runner, who doesn't make any money from things, but still want to, be rewarded for the work that you put in. The marathon is like that next big goal. We're not going to make an Olympic team, but we can make an Olympic trials. So I think that there's definitely some sexiness to being able to hit a standard that is very hard to do and is seen, is a very respectable thing to do, at least in our sport. So that's my approach to it. It's just like that next, it was just the next thing to do, that the next big goal to have that was achievable.
Yeah. I mean, I guess after CIM this year, which I didn't run, when that was over, I was like so happy that the trials window was closed. So I didn't have to like train for the marathon anymore. Cause like the same thing, like going for that is like, it's such a cool and hard goal. And I think, everyone should do a marathon. It's great. But it's not my favorite thing to do. And then also like I feel like the kind of races that I'm really attracted to now aren't typically marathons, which are like the really community oriented, grassroots, more localized, friendlier events. Those typically aren't marathons. And I think people would often have a much more robust running experience if they focus a little more on those than like the really big travel marathons. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it does have an insane cultural hold on us. Like that's why we see people go from marathon to marathon, and it's such a hard thing to do, and it's such a cool accomplishment when someone does it. But there are so many beautiful, creative races that really uplift communities that are not marathons, and they do not get 1% of the focus. Yeah, so I think that's like where my head is. And I love racing shorter stuff because you can do more things and our athletes can do more things and be in the community a little more. And so I think that's like where personally and professionally I lean more towards. But I mean, yeah, it's such a cool thing. And like the same, we have the trials, but regular people have Boston, like this random hard number that someone said, you can't come in unless you do this. It's like, well, I'm going to try to do that, And I think it's such a cool thing and such a prestigious and hard thing to try for. So I think that's really fun. But outside of that, we should open our focus.
It's such a project, the marathon. It's just as much an achievement of a certain time as it is almost like a measure of your own self-development. It's a job, right? You have to put it in every single day, or as much as you can over the given week, to be able to achieve something that is very difficult to do.
And after like school, people don't have that many more like finite, like you did it, pass, fail. There's not that many more things. So it's like a cool thing that we bring into the adult world. But
you only get so many opportunities to run a marathon too at your very best. So I think it makes it really easy to just want to do another one, because it's not like when we were racing, when you could run miles and 5Ks and you could run dozens of them over the course of a year. To really run your best at the marathon, you got a couple tries. And sometimes it goes really well and it gets you excited for the next one. And sometimes it doesn't go really well and you're just itching to do the next one. So I do think that there's something internal there, psychological, that keeps us chasing this dream that is sometimes it's just a dream.
Not hot taking enough nearly from either of you guys, but that's okay. Let's move on with the conversation.
I kind of said the marathon sucks.
Yeah,
in a very kind way.
You danced around it a little bit. I was expecting Will coming in, coming in with a hard right hand to that marathon, and I didn't get that, but that's okay. Let's
Well,
move on for the
well,
rest of the
also,
conversation.
I feel like a lot of my hot take is around the majors, and I figured we would have its own time
Yeah, we'll give
to
that its own time to shine.
to
I will
punch on
say,
that. And I feel like that's where most of my angst towards the marathon comes, not like we were kind of talking about the Buckeye Marathon the other day, or I mean, a lot of the ones I really like are starting to become a little too like grandma sold out again in like 3 days, and CIM like they're starting to become like that now, where it's harder to run them. But yeah, that's where a lot of my angst with the marathon comes from.
and I will say that I think some of the best races, even in the U.S., are non-marathon distance races. Stuff like Falmouth. There's a race I used to do in Pennsylvania called the Run for the Diamonds, which was just this
Boilermaker.
awesome Boilermaker. Yeah, just these like awesome classic,
Dude, meet me downtown Tucson is one of my favorite races.
yeah, yeah,
I've been there
like
like
stuff
four
downtown
times. I
mile.
love it
Like
every time.
there's all these like little mid-sized races that I think provide, like you said, a really really cool grassroots experience. Some have been around for like 50 years. Like that's the stuff I'd recommend really checking out if you're a little tired of the marathon. Like let's try to find some of these awesome grassroots things and
I mean, same in the ultra
invest
world,
there.
like Stagecoach from the San Francisco Peaks to the Grand Canyon, and like the history with that and how it connects those communities. Such a cool grassroots local event with local companies tied in. You will have a very cool experience compared to like, some of the bigger ones like Western or
Well, even
things
like
like that.
all the UTMB run races now, like it's just that they don't have that really like connected feel to the community that like a race that like Ian Torrance would put on, or some of these other smaller racing companies that are really invested in their local communities, or Air Vipa, for instance. All their
I'm
races feel connected to Phoenix.
100%. And I'm inherently very unattracted to how logistically it is to do half the things in the sport. Like if you want to run West, you could write a book on how to qualify for Western. It's like, oh, well, there's these races and it changes every year. And then there's this lottery. And like, well, how do you even go there? Well, you need like 8 hotels, and like it's just such a hard thing to do. And for some people, that is so fun to do, but that's a small portion of the sport. We need people who like, oh, it would be nice to run a 5K. How do I sign up and run it in a couple weeks? Like, we don't need these like how to get into Harvard-esque type of race. Like that's why half of getting into Boston, why you need a coach, is because you don't even understand how to do it. It's like, well, there's these races that count and there's this qualifying window, and well, your age graded time, but honestly, it's probably going to be like 7 minutes fast. Like it's there's some of it's getting too complicated, and we need the classic, like so many people's stories start because there was a local event, and on Tuesday they decided to go to run the race on Saturday with their friend, and then they got hooked. Whereas if you tried to go run a race and they're like, well, you got to qualify 2 years ago, buddy, sorry, like that's just, I feel like that loses kind of what's great about running.
And that's a great segue because I really want to pull that into race selection, because I think that's a big part of season planning. It's like, okay, we have this big goal 18 months down the line. How are you helping your athletes choose their races, from their goal races where they're going to hit their times to the in between stuff to their tune-ups? How do you have those conversations?
I just wrote a thing up. If you've ever looked on Marathon Guide, they do have you guys ever seen that where they
Yeah.
have the percentage? I just sent
Yep.
that to a bunch of people. So, I mean, that's one place I start. That's what I do for myself too. I have a big spreadsheet and I write down all the potential races I might want to do next year. And I tell people to do the same. And then I look back on the past ones like, oh, yeah, I love that one. But going through that and then seeing any that are local or that you would travel to or that work out, and then we can kind of start to break those down. But if your goal is Boston, then you want to give yourself a better chance. Like you'd want to run CIM over LA or something like that, like go give yourself a better shot. I think that's where I start anyways, if you're a Boston person.
I definitely think it's good to have a plan going into it, because if I can prevent people from doing too many races on a whim, then it allows me as a coach to be able to plan around it and plan it into the training cycle. Versus I don't see a problem being very repetitive. A lot of running is boring sometimes. It's very repetitive. To get better, it's not the prettiest thing in the world. And I have no problem training that way. But a lot of people tend to get stale when you're just kind of doing training without having something to work towards. So even if there's not a marathon for another 9 months to a year, I like to have some of those races built in so that we can at least have something to either be a benchmark of fitness or just something to help get them out of the door. Because when you're kind of running aimlessly, getting out and running and training, you don't have the same drive. It's like not everyone is able to just go and run hard and train vigorously all the time when there's nothing looming in the distance. So if I'm looking at a marathon or a goal race that's later in the year, then I want to try to fit in some type of shorter events, or if it's a 5K, then maybe we work in some longer events in the months leading up to it, and then try to shape the training to where it's not too much, but it's sustainable so that we don't have to, so that we can prevent as much downtime as possible. Because if you can have sustainable training for 9 months out of the year, then that'll really help you eventually get into the more specific phase of marathon training or whatever distance that you're doing, and you can really push hard.
I disagree a little bit on some of the things you said there, Dylan, when it comes to the racing stuff. Like, I feel like I'm always trying to talk my athletes into racing more. Like, I'm like, pick a race, like race whenever you want, like within reason. Don't race every weekend, but if you want to race twice a month, like please race twice a month. Part of it is like, I just want them to develop racing skills,
Mhm.
like understand how your routine that morning is going to go. Know when you're going to have your breakfast. Know when
Dude,
you're
I
going
have
to
a
take your dump.
giant write up about the day of and morning of, and 100%. I'm trying to get people to practice that.
Yeah, and
Such a skill.
I feel like I'm pulling teeth to get people to race. So many are just like, "Oh, I'm gonna race this marathon. I'm not gonna do anything between now and then." And I'm just like, "Well, how do you know what you're gonna have for breakfast?" Like, there's just so much stuff, and this racing is a skill, like being on the starting line, knowing how to deal with the energy of the people around you, how to run that first mile. Like, while it's not exactly the same from a 5K to a 10K to a marathon, there's still things you can learn about how to not get caught up in things, how to run in a crowd, how to handle parking on that morning of. Like, I want my athletes to race. And also I think that in a lot of ways, like racing is the best training. I feel like that, and sometimes in training, they're not always getting the most out of their workouts. And if they go run a hard 10K, like I know they're getting a lot out of that session and they're going to maximize that session. So I'm the opposite. I'm like, I'm not trying to hold you back from racing. Get out there, find your 5Ks and 10Ks and just go freaking do it, because I think that there's so many positive things that come from that.
How many races would you say would be too many races? So I guess my question for you all first is, let's say you don't have your goal race isn't for another 9 months, is just the example here. Do you have planned breaks in that 9 months? Are you trying to sustain training for that period of time? How many races or too many races within a given period or block? What are your thoughts on that?
All depends on the athlete, like there's people like us, like I've gone years without taking a planned day or week off. So knowing who that is, and then I mean, yeah, and so like that, like that changes. Like, are we going to have an actual off week, or is it going to be like a really low down week or something? Um, and then also like so, and then like how much racing? Like I'm trying to push racing towards what we need. So like, there's some people who you have are like I have a guy who is very very fast. Like so, for a lot of people who don't have that speed, maybe we don't need as many 5K. Maybe we're trying to get some more 10Ks and halves there so we can, build on those things. And then vice versa. There's some people who want to run faster in the marathon and their huge limiter is their speed. Like their 5K pace is way too slow to hit their goals. So, we're trying to get more 5Ks in to work on that. But I don't think I have any hard and fast rules. For one, it's too hard to do that, like with race selection. Like for some people live in strange areas, and so like anytime there's a race, I'm like, let's do it. I don't care what it is, because there might not be another one for like 4 months. I
That
don't
makes
know,
sense.
Nick. Do you have any
I mean, I like to
guidelines?
make sure that, especially after like a longer buildup, if it's ending with a marathon, or let's say it ends with a goal race, a goal half, a marathon, even if it's a goal 10K, if we've been training for 16, 20 weeks in a row, like I want to take a full week off. for sure. And I try to make sure that all my clients take at least 2 total, maybe 3 full weeks off over the course of the year, just to, recover. I think, and some athletes are really resistant to that, but I'm like, you just got to take the off time. Like everybody takes off time. You got to give your body a chance to recover. So in like a 9-month span, I'm hoping that they're taking 2 full weeks off, and that's enough time for 2 full 16, 18-ish week cycles. So that's 2 weeks off with maybe a goal 10K and a goal half marathon. And we're going to race in each 16-week cycle, 4 or 5 times, hopefully, a couple 5Ks, a couple 10Ks, ending with a half. Marathon cycle is going to be a little bit different, depending on if they want to do a tune-up half, but tune-up half 3 to 4 weeks out. If they want to race a 5K or 10K 2 weeks out, I'm okay with that. I think it's a good way to just kind of like blow the tubes out. And then all of a sudden, like you go to marathon pace, that feels real smooth after running a hard 5K or 10K. So, early portions of training, race 2 5Ks a month for the first month. Maybe we back off a little bit for the middle section and focus on training and long runs. We hit that half, we hit a 5K, 10K a week or two later, and then you go into the marathon. So anywhere from 5 to 7 times, depending on the athlete, where they're at and what they have access to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say. When I'm building out training, I try to, especially if the goal is far away, I try to make the training so you never really get to the point to where you feel as though you really have to take time off. I feel like if you've gotten to that point, I feel like I feel like I've led my athletes in the wrong direction. I want to make sure that things are very sustainable and they don't get to the point to where they're mentally burnt out. Because that's the bad one. I mean, injuries suck, and you can tell when you've really been pushing it with your athletes and maybe you've overdone it. And I think there's point in times in the season where if it's towards those goal races, you kind of have to push it a little bit. You have to take those risks. You have to ask them to do some things that you don't know if they're going to be able to do. And it's worth it because there's going to be a goal race and there's going to be some time off to take after it. But when you have a long time to build up for something and there's not really like an A race in there, if it's some 5Ks or 10Ks or maybe even a half marathon thrown in there, I try to build in the recovery enough so that they can consistently train almost year round without feeling as though like, hey, I'm so dead right now. I just got to take some time off. And I find it really hard because I've had some athletes who I've kind of let persuade me into thinking that they were okay. And me being allowing that to happen too. I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll just kind of keep going. You just let me know how things feel. And then they get to the point to where they're training harder than they've ever trained. They're feeling terrible. They're not sleeping well. They're gaining weight. And all this is simply because they're burnt out. And now I have to say, hey, you need to take a month off versus we could have planned a couple days during the week or lighten the load a little bit and wouldn't have come to that conclusion.
When you said like when they don't have an A race like in the near future, one of the things I really use for that is I just don't give long runs for like general purposes. Like if we're like coming back, or a lot of people who I like onboard and see their old training, they just do like long runs year round for like they don't even have anything coming up or like there's no long races. And I don't know. I think sometimes like we quit thinking about the stimulus for long runs. We're just like, gotta have a long run. And like if you have a 5K person, a low mileage person, someone that doesn't have something long in the near future, I think that's one of the easiest ways to like kind of keep some of that freshness is like don't use that until you need it. Yeah, that was just my initial thought. But yeah, I mean, that's the same. Like I kind of with how I schedule stuff, like, or I mean, same with like certain workouts. Like some people just as soon as they start a block, they're just like, all right, we're hitting some hard threshold, and it's just like we're like, I don't know, we're like 9 months from your race, but we don't need to do mile repeats yet. Like I don't know, like I don't know. I think for a lot of folks, you can only sustain like hard stuff for so long, and so
Agreed.
We talked about this a little bit last time where it's like in a 16 or 20 week buildup that there's really only 8 weeks of really hard sessions. Like everything else is table setting. It's 200s, it's strides, it's easier fartlicks before you get into the really hard stuff. So it's not really 16 weeks of really focused, hard, intense training.
I like to actually, if I have a long time to build someone up, I like to tell them that, hey, we're training for the marathon now. You know, if it's April and they're trying to do something in October or November, I will build in marathon training workouts, starting very small. Could be half mile on, half mile off, and then come mile on, mile off, and then 2 miles. But I'll build that up over time, so where it's almost like it's a very slow build up, so that the point when they get into like the specific phase of training, they're not flipping a switch. They're simply just doing a little bit more at the same pace that they were doing previously. So I'll always still mix in a lot of a highly variable amount of training, different types of intensities, especially early on. We might focus a little bit more on, like you were saying, some of the shorter reps, strides, maybe some 200s, 400s, always going to have some threshold work built in there, at least for my athletes. And then, every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I'll throw a long run workout in there. And the long run might not be very long, could be 14 or 15 miles, but I might have like 6 to 8 miles of marathon pace in there. And then I'll actually just build that up over time, so that the point when they get into the marathon training, the risk of injury is relatively lower, but also they've been able to build this up to where I'm not burning them out mentally for those harder weeks that, those 8 weeks that you're suggesting. They're more prepared for it. Their body's ready for it.
Bro, even like, you have people all the time that like they request a call or want to do a consultation or something, like, okay, I got 16 weeks, I got 20 weeks, when should I start? Like, even that, you could extend that out even longer. Like, like you're saying, like, same thing I did, like, it's a gradual progression. There's no like switch flipped and then we're doing marathon training. But like that can even go back to like 9 months, like that long progression is just what's going to help you not get injured, because your body, not only physiologically but just even neuromuscularly, like, it's slowly that build and knows it can handle that safely. So it's always tough when people are like, when should we start? When would be a good time to sign up? And it's like, I don't know, 10 years ago? Like, it's like, I always struggle answering that question, because you're like, you don't want to sound like a salesman. Like, yesterday you should have, like, I don't know.
I definitely like to blend it. I like to blend it a little bit better. I do not like the thought of like block training. Like, you've seen people go from like, hey, I'm gonna do base where all I do is easy running, and then I'm gonna go and run just a bunch of intervals, and I'm just gonna do interval training, and now I'm gonna go do marathon training, and it's like,
dude, Nick said something last time about like being Lydiard based, which I don't think he is. But that's like the only thing I've read Lydiard stuff like 10 times. I have no idea what he does. Like, I genuinely like explain, but all I know is that he has intense periodization, which I've never seen like an intelligent fast runner do. Like, I'm in a hill bounding phase for the next month, or I'm in this, like, I've never seen anyone do that besides Arthur Lydiard. Other than that, I couldn't tell you like any workouts or what his real principle. People say, I don't know, people just say everything. Like, if they're running a lot, they're like, well, I'm a Lydiard guy. It's like, I guess. Also, I think every Lydiard dude was full of crap because they didn't have GPS. Every book's like, oh yeah, this guy, he's a 146 guy. He was running 140 miles a week. It's like, whatever. Frank Shorter says that all the time too. He ran 120 like 5 years in a row. Show me the GPS file.
These are the hot takes that I wanted. Finally, we're getting the Will Baldwin hot takes out.
Actually, I was thinking before I showered last night, I don't want to hear anything about anyone's mileage if I can't see it. How many people do you know actually run high mileage that you can go and see?
Just the people I follow on Strava.
I'm just saying. I mean, like, yeah, I even have friends who used to have private Stravas and now are public, but they're like, oh, I don't run that much anymore. I'm like, so you only ran a lot when none of us could see it. Because I did. You can see all my stuff. I've run a lot of 120s in my day. It's public. But if you're saying it, throw it up. Send me the link. Anyways,
we'll have to get a hold of Frank Shorter and have him verify the 120
mile weeks. Road.
Yeah, he's right by you. Go knock on his door.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave Frank alone, but I'm just saying. What are we talking about?
When it comes to we're talking about more like a blend of training and a progression.
Oh yeah.
Going into whatever your specific goal is. How do you guys feel about how mileage? This is a good way to blend that in here. How do you feel as though mileage builds into that too over the course of a season? And
Are you guys mileage guys? Do you assign stuff in mileage?
I do, yes.
it depends. Whatever. It's more of like it depends on what it is. It's for some workouts I'll do minutes, but
But I
some
mean,
Yeah,
like
will
day to
workouts will
day,
do minutes and fartleks and stuff, but day-to-day stuff is all miles, 4,
yeah, same.
5,
you
6,
guys
yeah.
are true roadies.
I wish I could, transition all my athletes into minutes and time, but I think there might be a collective revolt
Yeah.
Yeah,
on
I
that.
started that way. I'm fairly certain there's probably like 2 people that didn't work with me because I refused to do my but I mean, especially like if you're doing any type of elevation or trail stuff, it is so pointless and we can't track anything off mileage.
Yeah. I'll pretty much only do minutes for the athletes who have the history of running collegiately or, in the sub elite category of things. I just find that if I assign someone a 30-minute run sometimes and it could be less than 3 miles, I'm just like, I don't love that. I'd rather it be in miles. I'd rather give them 3 or 4 or 5 miles than, have them go run a 30-minute run.
I guess that I mean also I have athletes that have a very big range of because I have people who giving them 5 miles could take an hour, and then there's people that it could be 33 minutes for. So
Yeah.
I think that's also why I'm very on the time train.
I think it really just depends on like, I mean, if you said, hey, like I'm gonna give you 2.5 hours, Will, like in some instances, like I mean, you could be running 24 miles. Like that's a long, like you could be running for a long, like that's a long way versus 2.5 hours for someone else could be 10 or 12 miles. And if depending on what you're training for, I don't love to only have them run 10 or 12 miles.
Well, then you have to adjust that load accordingly. But what I tell everyone, and I'll tell you guys now, is physiologically, our body doesn't recognize distance. So, if like fueling purposes, it doesn't care if you ran 3 miles or 8. Certain things are going to happen to carbohydrates on a certain interval time, and it doesn't matter how far you went. And the same thing with like, fatigue or like oxidation in our muscles. Like we can kind of pinpoint on average when that happens time wise, but um, there's no correlation to that distance wise. And the same with like an easy day. Like we know about how far we need to run to get an aerobic benefit to where we
Mhm.
stop before that muscle oxidation period. And again, that's on a time interval. And the biggest thing is and myself and everyone else is like on those days when you feel really bad, that pace is going to naturally be way slower and you're going to go less far. But when someone's totally wrecked and they're at mile 5.5 and they're like, well, I got to run a half more mile where I'm wrecked because I'm a finisher and I run 6. I'm trying to delete that part from the training of my athletes to where we ran that really crappy half mile so you could hit 6 on your watch. Whereas if you're going for an hour, you were just chilling the whole time and the hour ended earlier, you didn't have to extend that out. That's my
I
minute
tried to
pitch.
follow the whole 2.5 hour, rule. Like, hey, you don't need to run more than 2.5 hours, or you kind of get negative effects or whatever. But then I would just find that people would just feel vastly underprepared for the distance that they were training for, like for the marathon. Like it would just not go well. Like there was just the correlation just wasn't there versus having that same person being able to actually build up the somewhat more mileage that's more relevant to the distance.
For sure. I mean, I've never done the 2.5 hour. I mean, obviously, like for some people, like if they're then you kind of get into percentages. Like if you're a
Oh, yeah.
4 hour marathoner, like, yeah, we probably need to do some 3 hour
Yeah.
long runs.
Yeah. And obviously
and
you can't do that.
those loads change for people because some people
Yeah.
need a bigger training load because it takes them longer to finish events. But I think that's also really helped me ingrain in my athletes, like the whole easy day, easy. Like I give everyone this whole pitch about just put the time on, don't look at the pace, don't look at the distance, and learn to like listen to your body and vibe a little bit.
That'd be nice if that was true for everyone. I would love that. That'd be great if I could teach that to every one of the runners that I coach.
Get them off the mileage, man.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
I hard disagree. I think we can be the change we wish to see in the world.
Okay. Nick, thoughts?
I was just gonna say that feels like a good place to stop with
Okay.
that inspiring quote from Will. I mean, in an ideal world, yeah, I would like to have all my athletes and even myself personally work off the time. It's not an ideal world that we live in. I can't create my own world.
Why can't
I've
you run
tried
off time, Nick?
to run off the time, but I'm too neurotic and and it
So then
doesn't
you're
work.
passing that neuroticism on to them?
I'm not passing it on to them. I'm not reflecting my neurotic tendencies onto them. I just know that I think the path of least resistance is to go off of miles, and it's a I mean they're both good ways to track whether it's time or mileage. But gosh, I'm just getting the judgmental looks here from the both of you. But
Will
yeah,
did say that he runs 120 miles a week, not 14 hours and 37 minutes. So
That's
I did
back in the
track my
day.
triathlon training in time. That was the way I tracked that because I think that's the only way you really can, unless you're adding your yards swam to your miles biked and your miles run. So
it's true.
so there is a place for that. But yeah, maybe
Well,
I
same
am
with
just
biking. Like if you have like a super hilly route, it's like not comparable to if you're
absolutely
flat
no, and
ripping.
I agree that I don't have a lot of trail ultra athletes. Just the nature I think of the platform that I coach on. I don't get a lot of them, and I would coach them based on time versus distance because 6 miles with 1,500 or 2,000 feet of elevation gain is different from 6 miles flat. And you're going to see a huge difference in that stimulus. I mean, I know that for myself when I'm training for ultras that the distance and then the number of miles that I'm doing doesn't really matter as much as the amount of time I'm spending on my feet. And I do agree with Will on all the scientific stuff, the nutritional stuff, and when we're talking about glycogen synthesis and when you run out of glycogen and when you hit the wall, all that stuff is time based and not distance based. A little bit effort based too, which is another reason maybe to understand your correlation of your pace per mile to your correct physiological efforts or whatever. But I'm not sure where I was going with that. I was just kind of
Sounds like you were gassing me up.
well, I think you're right, and I think like again in an ideal world we would try to train everyone by time, but there is also this like societal, just like the societal expectation or the club that you get from running a marathon. There is this expectation around mileage or
Nobody
the
asked how
number
many
of
miles you ran
kilometers
in the
you ran.
marathon.
No one.
No one asked how many miles you ran in the marathon. Boston doesn't want to know if you ran 26.2. They want to know your time.
Well, things like Strava do exist, and people do want to know the mileage they ran, and they want to be able to show off. And so there
You
are
can't go ahead.
so
Go
I
ahead.
think the I'm just gonna keep plowing through here. I think like the effort that would be consumed to try to talk all my athletes off of mileage versus just like, hey, let's just work within the confines of the system that we have. I think it's fine. It works for what I'm trying to
Hey,
accomplish.
here's your homework, both of you guys. Start sneaking in a couple 35-minute easy runs to your people.
I do my first week back for everybody is on time, 20 to 30 minutes of easy running for the first week back because I really want the emphasis to be on just spending time on your feet versus trying to get in your 4 miles. But
I do
yeah.
doubles on time. That's what I have people do. So if I have people running multiple times a day, that's on time.
We're getting close.
Right.
Just got to keep that going. Maybe next Monday, we just throw a regular run. Take that 9 miles away. Give them 70 minutes.
We'll see how
I
it
like
goes.
to I like to do the post race run. I like that to be in time.
30 minutes, super easy. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll have them do a long run. It just depends, like it could be like 90 minutes time on feet.
They
So,
all can be.
I don't know if I'll go. I don't know if I'll go. I'll probably get fired by a lot of people if I just impose
It
time.
still tracks it. It's still in there. Bro, I mean that right there to me is a red. When someone's that way, we have to have a serious. Why is it so important to you that you need to run 40 miles a week? What do you think that does? Who told you that? Would you
That's a good
see on the
question to ask.
internet?
That's a good question to ask.
Are we trying to be as fast as we can, or do we want a weekly run streak?
That has to be a different conversation.
Are we running for physiological improvement? Or are we running for Strava? Just some questions.
All right.
And on that note,
let's recap this, Nick. Let's go ahead and crumple this one up and throw it away.
before, before we get into the psychological discussion with Will Baldwin about how how to handle coaching. Let's recap it. So, and any final kind of broad stroke thoughts from either Will or Dylan about season planning, based on our conversation here.
Yeah. So I think, at least from what I've taken from this, is that try not to focus on one thing all year round. Make sure that you're incorporating plenty of races in preparation for the biggest race that you're doing. Make sure that you give yourself space and ample recovery between those bigger races. And yeah, I think that's at least yeah, give yourself some time to really slowly build up the specificity versus segmenting things into blocks and saying, hey, I have to run X amount of long runs or X amount of miles or X amount of weeks to prepare for this distance. If you look at it more of a long-term vision over a year or even 6 months, you can definitely work in other parts of your training that can elevate what could possibly happen or become of the marathon or whatever distance you're racing. I always revert to the marathon for some reason.
I have a question for you guys. I said the thing about like the marathon guide site where you can look up the Boston percentage, like for races. Is there any metrics you guys like when someone throws a race at you, like, or is there any direction you're giving to someone when they're looking at a race, when they're planning out their year? Have you ever like vetoed, like, dude, don't do that. That race sucks.
I for sure vetoed races. Yeah, I mean, or if they want to do like take Big Sur, they're gonna run Big Sur, super popular bucket list race. Great, go run it. Don't have expectations you're gonna PR there. That's not a
Right.
BQ race. Or they'll send me they'll send me events. I always go look at the website, check the elevation, gain loss, look at like the aid station frequency, number of finishers, just stuff like that. Just to make sure that it's not just like, hey, you get an aid station every 6 miles on this marathon, or so you have to carry all your own fluids, or it's like a net uphill the second half. I just try to like, just kind of quality control those things and make sure that it's going to be a worthwhile race to do.
I try to make sure to let people know that if they run a downhill race, it doesn't count as their PR.
That's a whole other can of worms. Like I like revel races, races
Doesn't
that have
count.
like three that
I
hate
had a
that
dude
stuff.
who signed up for like 3 back-to-back this year, and he got his BQ on the third one.
If all you do is run downhill races, then sure, I'll give it to you. But like if your goal, if you want to say you go from a downhill race to you want to go run majors, and that's kind of the thing that you normally do, I say, hey, you got to put an asterisk on it. It's not your PR. Like you have to separate that from well, otherwise I have people who will just chase that downhill time and probably never hit it again.
As long as they differentiate like a revel race from like CIM, because I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes people talk like CIM like that. It's like 300 feet.
Yeah.
And a revel
Yeah,
race is
CIM
like
doesn't count either.
1,000 or something.
Yeah, you're running from the top of Mount
I'm kidding, I'm
Charleston.
kidding.
It's
I'm kidding. That's a joke. That's a joke.
I thought CIM was kind of hilly.
I'm just messing. CIM counts.
That always is kind of hard though when someone's like is planning and they bring me a race and like I pull up the profile and there's like 180-foot hill in the middle and you're like, do you have any other ideas? Or
Well, there's the Portland Marathon or Seattle Marathon. Like those courses aren't easy, or even like Rock and Roll San Diego. I mean,
LA?
we've all run AFC half. Like those courses are not like. There's tons of races that are popular that are just not good setups to run well or to run fast, at least for most people. And that's not to say
Los
you can't.
Angeles.
LA is a great one. Yeah, LA, especially with the way the new course is set up when you turn around and finish the last 10K coming back uphill. Like there are some races that just aren't set up well. So I think it's about just auditing those things and making sure that you're pointing them in the right direction
Without
or making
avoiding
them.
the challenge either, I think we can't all just run fast flat all the time.
Sure.
No,
Well, it's
but
also
but lining up with what they're like, okay, I'm trying to BQ, and then they bring you.
Yeah.
Like I had a lot of people go to Hawaii this year. I'm like, it's gonna be windy, it's gonna be humid. Like they don't have the most insane aid stations, like for all the like. I don't know, it's probably not the race. You traveled across the globe.
Yeah, it's just managing expectations and understanding even with, and this is a whole other conversation about the majors. It's like these aren't necessarily set up for you to run fast, and so just having that understanding going into it's important. So
we will talk about this when we talk about the majors, but I also am very anti international. Like when someone's trying to run as fast as possible, I'm like, I think the worst thing I could possibly do is to go to Europe. And although Dilla did PR, I just don't travel well.
I don't. Well, it's just like travel well. What are you eating? Like for me, be like, when am I gonna poop? Like, am I gonna get back on a normal poop schedule? And the answer is probably not. And so
I
that's an
found mine
important
in the
part of
middle of the
racing
race,
well.
so yeah. Yeah,
So
I got on my schedule in the middle of the race.
It's hard for me to fly to California. Going to wherever you went, Denmark, Brussels, Belgium,
Frankfurt, Germany.
Germany.
Yep.
I'm adding 20 minutes to my time.
all right. Well,
All right,
on
wrap
that
it.
note, I think this is a good time to wrap it. Thank you so much for everyone for listening to the Mind Your Miles pod. Again, we do have an email, mindyourmilespod@gmail.com. Shoot us a message if you have any questions you want us to answer, any comments, feedback. We're always happy to hear that. Final thought, Will Baldwin, 5 seconds, go.
Got nothing.
He's got nothing. All right. Well, on behalf of Dylan and Will, thank you so much
Why
for
didn't Dylan
listening to
get
the
a final
Mind Your,
thought?
because I wanted to throw it to you. Dylan's had plenty of thoughts on this podcast.
Oh, okay. I'm good. Let's
All
go
right.
home.
On behalf of Will and Dylan, my name is Nick. Thanks for listening to the Mind Your Miles pod, and we'll catch you next time.